Thank you. Fuquay-Varina. Goldston. Holly Springs.
Hey, good afternoon. Good morning. Tim Forrest, Holly Springs. I think I'm probably one of the newest people in here. Was elected in November, and I've been on the TJCOG officially, I think, since January. So I look forward to learning and growing with all of you.
Thank you, sir. Johnston County.
This is Butch Slaughter. I've been elected official since '99, and that was 14 of those years were 18 of those years was as a a town of Clayton councilman, and now I've been 3 years as a county commissioner in Johnston County. And like Jennifer, I've been on so long, I don't know how long that's been. So,
thank you, Butch. Kenley. Nightdale.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Latacious Morris. I am a council person for Nightdale. I was appointed in January of 2021 and officially elected into the seat in November. And I've been a TJCOG member that amount of time as well. And I am standing in for our mayor this morning.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Lee County.
Lee County, Kirk Smith. I'm the commission chair going on my second year. I've been an alternate for 2 years with TJCOG and a delegate for 1 year. And I've had 7 years in office.
Thank you, sir. Moore County. Morrisville. Orange County.
Sally Green, Orange County Commissioner. I've been an elected official for about 16 years in town and county government, and I believe this is the start of my 3rd year on the COG.
Thank you, Sally. Pine Level. Pinehurst. Pittsburgh. Princeton. Raleigh. Robbins. Rolesville.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Kern. I've been on council for 20 years and mayor for 2. Probably been involved in this group maybe 15, 16 years, Lee. Can't remember for sure, but somewhere along in there. And great time here. This is a good group. You guys is just joining. You'll really get a lot out of it.
Thank you, sir. Sanford.
Good morning. This is Rebecca Whitehoff-Salmon. I was, elected back in 2011. So I guess that's 11 years I've been on the Sanford City Council, and the whole time I have been on the Triangle J. And Ronnie, you're right. This is a great group. Looking forward to today.
Thank you, ma'am. Selma.
This is Byron McAllister. I'm actually here with our alternate delegate, Councilwoman Amy West Whitley. I have been elected official for the town of Selma with the council for a little over 2 years now, and actually have been mayor for coming up on 2 months. But I have learned quite a bit through TJCOG in a very short amount of time, and I greatly appreciate the information, the insight, the work TJCOG does for our communities.
I'm Amy West Whitley, and I was just elected to town council, and I am your delegate. And it's nice to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Thank you. All right. Siler City.
Hey, good morning. Bill Haggis, town of Siler City, and I've been on the town board for about 8 years and have been involved with the COG for about 7 of those years. I think I'm the first delegate that Siler City had after we joined.
That's correct.
It's been great.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Smithfield. Southern Pines. Vass. Wake County. Wake Forest. Wendell. Wilson's Mills. Zebulon. And I realized I skipped over Apex. I'm in Apex right now, and I skipped right over Apex. I'm sorry, Brett.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, I was gonna mention that. Brett Gant, Apex Town Council, have been on there for 4 years and on the COG for 4 years as well. Just a little side note: I'll be in Chapel Hill tonight, cheering on the heels.
No, I'm not going to get my trash collected this week now because I skipped Brett. Sorry, just kidding. All right.
And Lee,
ma'am.
Deidreana has joined us.
That's correct. One of our officers, Deidreana Freeman. Deidreana, you want to introduce yourself, City of Durham?
If you're speaking, you're on mute.
I am Deidreana Freeman, City of Durham. I was elected in 2017, and I've been with the COG, I think, since 2018.
Yep. Thank you, ma'am. All right, Madam Chair, we do not have a quorum, but we have enough to have a very good conversation around the strategic plan. So back to you.
All right. Well, welcome everyone again. And Monica Allen, who has been working with this group for the last several weeks and has shared, and I hope everyone has had a chance to look at the materials, the focus group results. And with that in mind, Monica, welcome, and hand it over for you for your guiding us through this process.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kathleen, and thank you, Lee. So happy to be with you today. I'm super excited to get to this point and take you through what I think is it's going to be a very quick 3 hours, or maybe slightly less than 3 hours now, to get you to a good place for the strategic framework for the COG. So that's really our end game today, in case those of you are like, well, what are we trying to accomplish today? But it's to get to a really good start place for the strategic framework. And so just to kind of further build it out for you, after today, we'll refine or draft the strategic framework. We'll take it back to the steering committee and then come back to the board. So you'll have an opportunity to see what was put together based on your insight and your feedback today. So I'm Monica Allen. I will be your facilitator today. So I'll share with you a little bit about who I am. I talked a little bit about the intent for today, but I would say, we really, really want to have active participation and involvement. We want to hear your voice. We want to get feedback. And we do understand that you're very busy, and we understand it's a Saturday. Maybe family matters you have to attend to, or personal matters, but if you could spend the next 3 hours with us really active and be great. So I'm going to go over the environmental scan findings. I shared this with the steering committee on Monday, but I decided that instead of going through all the detail, I'm just going to cover a couple of highlights on several slides with regards to environmental scan. And then we're going to spend some time doing mission and vision setting. Two proposals for you today. So there's an option for the mission statement. There's an option for the vision statement. So we'll pause and take some time, get some from you there. And then with regards to focus areas and definitions, we got a lot of good feedback around this areas for the COG. And we also got some other considerations that we want to bring forth to you. So we'll also ask for you to provide some input and some feedback there. I'll walk you through each of the focus areas. So we'll take it one by one. And then hopefully at the end of that time together, we'll have a really good set of focus areas, either revised and or refined focus areas, and then close out with organizational priorities. So if you're somebody like me that's a processor, you may want to go ahead and start thinking about, what should be those priorities for the next 3 to 5 years. But I would say in order to help inform what those priorities are, material this morning with you, go ahead, if you have some paper or if you can commit it to memory, just jot down some of the key themes and information that you're going to see, because we will ask you to reflect on that information when we get to the organizational priorities time on our agenda. And we'll also ask you to reflect on some of the things that you heard around feedback with regards to focus areas. There will be 2 10-minute breaks included. I went ahead and built 2 10-minute breaks, but if we realize we're running out of time, then I'll go ahead and push that down to 5 minutes. So we'll take a break after the environmental scan, just a quick short break. And then I believe after the focus area and definition that we'll do. I had an opportunity to meet a lot of you, the focus I say focus areas, focus groups. Also had a lot of opportunity to meet those of you at the steering committee meeting on Mondays. So for those of you not familiar with who I am, Monica Allen, originally from Chicago, Illinois, lived in Oklahoma City for a while, moved to Virginia to go to college. So I went to undergrad at Hampton University. It was when I was at William & Mary that I had an opportunity to get into government. I did not focus on government, to be honest with you. I focused on clinical psychology, but after some time in graduate school, I realized that organizational psychology was my passion. Had a really good mentor in the graduate program, and they suggested that I take an internship with the city of Norfolk in Norfolk, Virginia. So started in government in 2001 as an intern, and moved from there into Health and Human Services, into Public Works, and then got to a place where I said, okay, where am I going to go next? So it was either DC or North Carolina, and I chose North Carolina, and started with the city of Charlotte in 2006, working with the police department, supporting the chief of police on all his strategic initiatives. And then in 2007, moved over to Mecklenburg County. So I'm in the county manager's office, serve as a director of strategic planning and evaluation, supporting the county manager, her executive team, board of county commissioners on all things, as you can imagine, strategy related, performance, and program evaluation. Have a team of people that do a lot of the work that the COG does. So this is a really good opportunity for me to connect to an organization. So our COG here local, we work closely with as a county. And along with that, I do moonlighting consulting on the side, so I support smaller organizations and stuff like this. And then I also teach classes at the School of Government, Chapel Hill. So organizational theory, public financial management, and been doing that since 2014. So I am government through and through, and I didn't think 20 years ago I would be, but absolutely love it and love giving back to my community and helping decision makers make important decisions about the community. So that's about me, but it's not the Monica show. So again, for the intent for today, one is to understand the information that is going to be presented to you as it relates to environmental scanning. So I have a quick 30 minutes to go through what I think is a lot of information. If you had an opportunity to read the report, great. If you didn't, hopefully the highlights I provide for you will give you enough foundational knowledge and understanding. I want to have you engage one another and engage leadership. So there may be an opportunity where you have a question for Lee, or you may have a question for Jenny, and I think that's certainly okay, or the board chair, Kathleen. And then ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, to inform the development of a strategic framework. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our environmental scan. So in any strategic planning effort that occurs, if any organization, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, government, doesn't matter, is doing any type of strategic planning work, they must do an environmental scan. And that's our way of just sitting back and saying, okay, what's going on? What do we need to pay attention to? What is going to be what I would call several inputs into our strategic planning work, so that you're not sitting in an office or just sitting in a space saying, okay, this is what I think is important for the next 3 to 5 years, and you're operating with blinders, but you're really allowing time to listen to other people and hear what they have to say. And so that's what we did with the environmental scan. It's multifaceted. We did an employee survey, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We also did 4 focus groups, and in some form or fashion, some of that was an interview or a survey, depending on individual participation or lack of participation. Jenny and team, or Lee and Jenny and team, did interviews with peer COGs across the nation. So we'll highlight some of the findings there. And then also did document reviews. And so that was just another way for me to understand what's happened before with the COG, just to familiarize myself and just that we need to bring forth into the strategic framework. So with that, why do we do it? Again, deep dive into internal and external factors that could affect an organization, again, to help kind of take off the blinders, if you will, and to help an organization understand information that understand what may need to be of importance for a strategic plan. So again, my ask as I go through the next several slides is just you listen and document, take cursory notes if you can, or if you want to, or if you commit to memory some of the things, because that will be information you'll need to draw on when we start getting into the activity and engagement work. All right, so let's start with the employee survey and the findings there. So we conducted a survey with TJCOG employees. was administered online December 2021. We had about 22 respondents respond to the survey. There were 10 items on the survey, and then we had one question on there around tenure. This slide reflects the percent breakout for the employee respondents. So as you can see, the majority of the respondents to the employee survey were with the COG for less than 3 years. So that's about 40, 47, 48% of the employees out of the 22 that responded. And then the second largest group is at 33% with the 5 to 10 year tenure with the COG. So I will say that the employee comments that we received, when I think about it, and I've been reflecting on this, of course, all week, you will probably notice that there's some comments that may reflect some of those newer employees. And there's also some comments in there that may reflect some of the employees that have had longer tenure with the organization. And that's really good. So even though we have half of the 22, close to half of the 22 making up the responses that you may have read about, we do have a good balance with those other sub-demographic groups showing up in the employee survey. And one thing I forgot to mention, if you have any questions as I'm going through, just push I believe it's the raise your hand button, and it'll pop up, and I'll be able to stop and engage you. So again, there were 10 questions on the survey. So the first question on the survey was really getting to the purpose of the COG and the mission of the organization. So we wanted to hear from individuals what their thoughts were around how would they describe the organization? How do they think about the organization? The good thing is that what you see on the right side of this slide reflects a lot of the things that the COG does. And so I would say the takeaway there is that there's not a misunderstanding necessarily of the purpose or the mission of the organization. We had employees that have good foundational knowledge, which is good, because if employees don't understand the work of the organization, then they're not going to be able to reflect that work with the member organizations. So we feel comfortable there that there's that good solid knowledge base. We also got from them what they think some of the focal points are of the organization, and that could probably get to some of the purposes that were talked about on the previous slide. But here are some of the things that they said. We do these things. We help individuals and organizations understand issues around or matters around water conservation, mobility, transportation, housing, affordable housing, community economic development, and aging and human services. And there's other things sprinkled in there. So just wanted to share that with you because it did come out, even though we were more so focused on how would you describe the purpose or what's the work of the organization. But they also said, yes, while we serve, convene, collaborate, support, here are the things that we focus on, or we tend to focus on as an organization. So the second question that we asked employees was around kind of more of the envisioning. So they were to envision their organization in 5 years. How would they describe what the COG has accomplished in the region? And some of the things that came out is really around leadership, that employees believe that there is good leadership in place, but we would have taken even more of a leadership stance and position with certain issues across the region. And they listed some things, as you can see here, on water, housing, DEI. There were several comments around diversity, equity, and inclusion, climate resiliency, aging, infrastructure, and you can read the rest. But one of the things that came out on both the employee side and just a preview to what some of the focus group participants said as well is that the COG would be considered a thought leader in the region, that they are just the go-to, that as a member organization, we think about the COG first. We're not thinking about hiring somebody from university or a college. We're not thinking about hiring a consultant. We're actually thinking about engaging the COG. So as you think about the strategic, when we set the strategic framework today and when we go forward, and then bring something back to you, the bigger question is, how do we get to a place where we are that thought leader, we are that go-to? So we know that many organizations think of the COG right now as the go-to and the thought leader in that space or in certain spaces and places, but how do we do even more of that? And the other thing is individuals had mentioned that they want the COG to be seen as one of the top COGs in the state. And then I've heard from some other people as well as in the region, which I think is kind of reflective of that last bullet where it says regional hub. And then the third bullet was that, we would have created a comprehensive approach to all these issues. So something that came out in both the focus groups and the employee survey was that a lot of these things are interconnected. So even if we have focus areas that are seen as silos, really a lot of those issues are intertwined, they're intricately intertwined, very interconnected. So how do we take a comprehensive approach to work so that if a member organization says, hey, I need some support on housing, well, the COG can say, well, yeah, housing, but you also need to think about transportation and workforce development. Those are all connected, right? So that's opportunity. We know that a lot of what does already is reflective of those things that the employee. How do we do more of that? So I know the slide's a lot to process, but instead of breaking it down into 4 slides, I thought I would share the SWOT analysis with you and what's typically seen in a matrix format. So we asked employees what they thought the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are to the organization, and the SWOT is typically an internal look around what's going on with the organization. So these things that came out, or these themes that you see here, are reflective of employee opinion, not Monica's opinion on the strengths and the weaknesses and opportunities or the threats that may be facing the COG, but really what the employees were saying. So in terms of the strengths, in the top left corner, you can see the things that kind of also came out with how do you describe the organization, what's the purpose and the mission of the organization. So everything from communication to convening, leadership, funding, leveraging funding opportunities, networking, providing programmatic guidance or resources there. The staff culture is actually seen as a strength, staying abreast of research trends, and then of course, technical support, facilitation, admin services. When it comes to weaknesses, the weaknesses that employees had shared, and again, this could be, we spent some time with the steering committee on this one, but I think it could be reflective of those employees that are newer, maybe less tenured compared to those employees that have been with the organization for some time. So some of the weaknesses that came out, employees training and staff competency, that kind of goes along with that 4th bullet, limited institutional knowledge, lack of representation of diversity on staff, the limited funding for work. Now, we believe there may be perceptions that there's limited for work and or that employees may not necessarily understand funding model or the calculation formula for each of the member organizations and how funding is provided. So there could be opportunity there to educate the employees in that space. Marketing and promotion of work and branding. But as you can imagine, even if that is seen as a weakness, if that is something that this board says we need to do more of that, got to think about the unintended consequences of communicating, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do, and potentially bringing more work to the employee and to the organization. And so then that could raise the issue or cause a question of, does the organization have the capacity to take on the increased demand, and we're going to do more marketing and promotion. So some of this it's a good thing if you do it because you're trying to address it as a weakness, but what might be the consequences on the organization? Siloed program areas, and we know that is intentional in terms of how some of the program areas are set up. But I think that also maybe employees don't perceive the reason why behind it. So that is something that we, again, similar to the marketing and promotion, or the funding models and the perception of the limited funding for work may need to be some education there as well. And then work alignment and inefficiency, and it could be a result because of some of the program structure, the structure of the program areas. And when it comes to opportunity, so opportunity doesn't necessarily mean that there's an issue, but it just means that, we can continue doing more of what we do. Or there may be that, hey, we're completely not really doing this and we just need to do it. So opportunities address regionalism and collaborate doing so. I think that presents a natural challenge if you're trying to take a regional approach to work. But how do you bring jurisdictions across 46 member organizations, from what I understand, rural and urban, in getting to that collaboration space, but that is an opportunity they perceive. Communication with member governments, so that's relationship building. So I think, even if member organizations are aware of what the COG does, how to build those relationships. to get to what some people said, 5 or 10 years down the road, we want the COG to be the go-to organization. Well, if I've built relationships with the elected officials, or if I've built relationships with the leaders, then maybe they say, hey, Monica with the COG, we really want to work with her, right? So I saw a hand raised. Go ahead. No?
No, it pops up on the bottom of my screen. I just turned it on.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, sir. A greater focus on DEI it also came up, expanding skill sets and cross and adult entertainment. So we know, we're thinking about all this in point in time, right? And we are in a pandemic. What are some ways that we support the older populations and the older adults with maybe other social options, entertainment options, just to kind of increase maybe the value out of the services to that population. Continue to research and stay abreast of trends, use of funding, and then youth engagement. So that did come out in a couple of the focus groups, as well as the employee comments around how do we, further engage the youth. And that could be everything from how do we help member organizations understand the value of youth and providing programs and services to meet the needs of the youth in the community, or maybe how do we engage the youth as it relates to what the strategic direction of the community should be. And then the threats. So threats are essentially those things that could pop up and could be what I would call silent killers, or things that could disrupt the organization or disrupt organizations. So employees are saying, well, other COG reputations. And that could be that if there are COG organizations or COG that do not have good reputations across the state, there may be a guilty by association. So that could be a threat. Employee turnover, we know that when employees leave, sometimes they go to member organizations to work. Funding restraints, lack of focus on DEI. And again, these are perceptions that employees have. Other organizations with similar staff competencies, and that could tie to employee turnover, reliance on partners, staffing capacity, workload, and work demand. So all of those things are threats. And so if you look at that threat bucket, yes, there are some things external, but there are a lot of things internal that could be considered threats to the organization operation. So I know that's a lot to process, but if there's anything you see that resonates with you or you have questions on, I'll stop and see if you want to get additional clarity or have any questions. And if so, you can just raise your hand or just jump in.
Monica, will you want us to comment and make our observations at the end when we go through this whole thing? You said kind of write down notes and then, we'll talk about it at the end. Do you want us to just kind of hold those thoughts and maybe make notes on our paper and not bring them up now, just right now, just ask for clarity?
Yeah, that would be great if there's any need for clarity, just because I want to make sure I keep us moving so that we stay on track. But thank you for putting that in the room. Okay, we'll move on. So,
Monica, real quick, this is Brett Gant. The one that that jumped out at me was the first threat, other COG reputations, and I feel like I'm admittedly a little bit. I don't have enough information about the other COGs to know are they good or bad, and also when talking about all these things that we can do, opportunities we can do, are other COGs, is that in the COGs purview, and also do other COGs do these things too? I think maybe a future meeting would be a COG overview across the state actually, and see what the scope actually is for what we can do here in this organization.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Brett, for that. And really with the threats, so if you think about what would probably be in direct control and influence of the TJCOG is addressing strengths or leveraging strengths, addressing weaknesses, and addressing opportunities. Those threats are those things that you just kind of need to be mindful of, right? So it may be nothing that you can really address directly. But if I was working for an organization, I knew that there was COGs that may not be seen as favorable in the community, then my goal would be, okay, how do I minimize that threat, right? I can't change the other organizations, but I can certainly, say, hey, here's what we do at, and try and get ahead of it a little bit. And so it's really just saying, you want to be mindful of these things, even if you don't have the direct control and influence. So the employee stuff, you probably can touch that a little bit, but the external stuff is stuff that's just kind of looming out there that you just need to be mindful of and pay attention to. But Brett, I think that would be great to understand a little more of the COGS in the state and maybe in the region. Great suggestion. So something for you to think about as you're thinking about the SWOT, and if you jotted it down, then maybe you can kind of put it together. But really, what we want when we do a SWOT, because people say to me all the time, well, now what do we do? So you kind of use the matrix and do one to address the other, right? So use the strengths to take advantage of the opportunities. Okay, so if I were to go back, one example would, one of the strengths is that we stay abreast of the research trends. That's a strength that the employees see. But then the opportunity is, where to go? Continue to research and stay abreast of the trends and or expanding skill sets and cross collaboration, right? So if we're doing a great job and we think that's a strength of ours, then how do we create even more opportunities for us to, stay abreast of those trends, right? So that's where you would look at both the strengths and the opportunities to say, let's use those strengths and take advantage of those opportunities. Or you take advantage of opportunities to overcome your weaknesses. Use the strengths to avoid threats, and then avoid threats by minimizing weaknesses. So that's kind of how you bring it together. And in some organizations, they actually will look at strengths and opportunities, or opportunities and weaknesses, or strengths and threats, and create goal statements to be able to factor all of that information from the SWOT into a strategic plan. So I have a couple examples that I'll share when we get to the end in terms of how we can combine several of those things that came up in the matrix, the SWOT. So you didn't realize that was question 3, 4, 5, and 6 in one slide. Trying to streamline for you. So question 7 was around the organization priorities, and I made them bold there. So there are 3 current organization priorities: service to our members, diversity, equity, and inclusion should be the second one, and data-driven decision-making. So we asked individuals to provide their thoughts there. Provide their thoughts on the current priorities for the next 5 years, and should there be additional ones. And so some things that came out, which is interesting because DEI came out, even though it is a priority, but was more clarifying the DEI element. The themes that you see on the right side is what people are saying, these additional priorities. On collaborative regional planning, having compassionate leadership and ethical leadership. So that should just be something that we always strive for. Sustainability, DEI, but that it should also include ageism. And there are comments where people said, we kind of need to focus also on disabilities. So it's not just about race and gender, but we also need to think about it from an age disability standpoint. Focusing on youth should be a priority. The need for the internal part of the organization to focus on DEI, because maybe there's some lack of knowledge. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a focus on DEI, but maybe, Monica as an employee of the COG does not necessarily operate with a DEI lens, right? So how do you teach Monica, or how do you train Monica to do that, right? Prioritize collaboration, have a multi-discipline collaborative approach, and then workforce development. But then question 8 was asking them to chime in on the current focus areas. There's 8 of them. There's 7 of them. And we wanted the employees to provide their thoughts on those current focus areas for the next 5 years. We wanted them to indicate if specific ones should be omitted or be modified. Going on in terms of what came out, but to start with that first bullet, concern that the focus areas may be seen as silos, and so we need to show the consider repurposing the strategy and innovation focus areas if that's something that becomes a priority in all areas, as well as technical assistance. So essentially what they're saying is that those topical areas, aging and human services, community and economic development, housing, natural resources and resiliency, are all kind of core topical, and transportation are all core topical areas, right? But the technical assistance and the strategy and innovation really should be a thread throughout those other ones, right? So we're not necessarily saying these are the focus areas and we're keeping strategy and innovation separate, but how do we think about aging and human services with a strategy innovation lens, community economic development with how do we provide technical assistance as that particular focus area. So again, that's a suggestion. There was general support for the current focus area. So that's the good news. I probably should have had that be my headline, but there was not an employee that said get rid of any of these. They were just saying, you know, here's opportunity. And that came out again with what you see with those other bullets, that technical assistance may be broad, so does it really overlap with the other ones or not? They weren't clear on that. Should we add something around climate change and energy and greenhouse gas to the natural resources and resiliency one, or separate it out? Focus on aging human services should have more information in terms of what it provides, but giving more information related to housing for the aging populations, caregiving, how to create dementia-friendly communities, all aging in place, incorporate resiliency into all focus areas. So that could kind of be the same as what I kind of talked about with technical assistance and strategy and innovation. And then somebody said to put housing and community and economic development. So again, this is just some suggestions from the employees, not saying that this is what you guys absolutely have to do, have to consider, but it's definitely information input for you as we go into the focus area definitions. Question 9, should there be any new ones? You can see on the right, there is some offering up of new ones to include a category of administrative and management services, education, healthcare, emergency services, land use engagement, and public safety, and then youth participation involvement, which some have said is really an offshoot of aging. And when I think about age-friendly communities, it's really 8 to 80. You know, they were kind of saying in that space that maybe we should just kind of capture this group of youth all the way to the older population. And then anything else for us to consider. So this was just kind of the catch-all. Some employees said, you know, evaluation of physical workspace, you know, let's see if we can have opportunities to have more ideas, share more ideas on collaboration, establishing more of a work community at work. They be mindful that, you know, the framework could be too broad, but we don't need to be too narrow. Have clarity in roles and responsibilities versus just broad collaborating and coordinating. What does that really mean? An evaluation accountability system, focus on employees doing the workload concerns that they have, I guess due to the workload concerns that they have. And then suggested retaining the innovative and incubator culture that exists currently. So lots going on with employees. But again, when we start doing some of the engagement work and I stop talking as much, then we can go back and I can either clarify and or you can contribute your thoughts there. So going over to the focus groups. The focus groups, there were 4 of them, held virtually, 2 in December and 2 in January. You can see the 4 focus groups that we had there for a total of 20 participants. So I think each one of those, I can say everybody was really actively engaged. I was excited to talk to the kind of disparate groups, but all, you know, sharing in the same goal for the organization. So starting with the first question, similar to what we asked with the employees about how would they describe the purpose of the organization, the mission. So general response is that, you know, the TJCOG convenes member organizations and provides collaborative opportunities and shares best practices, review other key data and information that offers a unique perspective of the COG for the members. So they were very the COG's work, and I think, you know, similar to what we saw with the employee responses, they've captured what the existing purpose and mission is of the organization. We did ask a different question of the focus group participants than what we did of the employees. So this question 2 here says, considering the COG's current offerings to its members, is there an opportunity for the COG to provide a greater level of support to the region? If so, what might that look like and why, and what issues across the region should the COG address? General response is yes, there's opportunity to provide a greater level of support. Some of the issues that came up across the region, housing, transportation, the aging population, and workforce development. People were saying, you know, really everything is connected. And some respondents understand there are real challenges with trying to bring all the member organizations and jurisdictions together to address issues and matters. So I think it's one of those things where people would like to see that, but it's kind of cautiously optimistic, if you will, from some of the respondents, and saying, you know, but there's some real challenges with trying to do that. And so the how do we do that, I think, you know, is going to require a creative and unique and innovative approach to addressing issues in the region by the COG and member organizations. The third question was similar to what we asked employees around the current focus areas, and any thoughts on the current focus areas for the next 5 years. Again, what should remain, be modified, or be omitted, and any new ones we should consider. Similar to the employees, the focus group participants said all the focus group areas are important. They need to probably refine the definitions to include current wording. So when we get to that space, and I pull up, like say I pull up aging and human services, the existing definition or the existing description, if there's anything that you see that we need to add, maybe or delete if it's not relevant to today anymore, or it may not be relevant in the future, then we can go ahead and capture the wording changes there. Some areas for consideration to add and or clarify, again, climate change, climate resiliency, clean air, water, communication, DEI. And then unlike the employees, in terms of the employees saying the same things or similar things around climate change, climate resiliency, clean air, water, communication, DEI, the focus group participants said, well, maybe there should be a greater training for elected officials and board members. Maybe there should be some onboarding. You know, if somebody gets into a seat for the first, the first year, maybe there's an opportunity for the COG to help them out. I know I know we send our Board of County Commissioners to Commissioner School here in Mecklenburg County, and they absolutely love it. But what could our COG do, right, to help them get oriented when they become a new commissioner with the county? And individuals also said we may need to address digital divide and inclusion somehow, some way. They weren't sure how it rolled into any of those things. And then it's also important to highlight the interconnectivity and the integration of these items. So again, you're seeing some similarities between the employees and the focus group participants. Question 4 was also one of those strategic direction. What do you think we should focus on going forward? We did have some similarities here with the focus group participants with the employee responses. So general response is that it should be the go-to organization to address all the member and regional matters, that they would have kept up with the changing landscape, the need for the change with technology, provide more services virtually. So some even said, hey, do we have to have our meetings in person? If we didn't have COVID, but is there an opportunity, for us to really do more things virtually? That they had the optimal staffing model with competent staff to address these issues. So what is that optimal staffing model? Of course, that's yet to be determined, but that is something that they said, 5 years from now, that they can handle the demand, again, whatever that demand is going to look like potentially in 5 years. And that they've addressed the why is it important for others, so that member organizations and others in the respective communities in the Triangle area really do understand why it's important for COG, for those organizations to work with, right? And then asking and answering the question, what's in it for me as a member organization? So if you can kind of start with the why and the what, and then back into that, then I think that would have the organization be better positioned in 5 years than where they are right now. And again, this is just a suggestion, so it wasn't somebody saying, well, I don't understand the value of the COG, but if we can really answer those questions and people understand why it's important and what's in it for me, then I think we would have done our job. And then clear and timely communication with helping others understand the mission and purpose. So that probably goes back to that 4th bullet that you see there. And I forgot to mention there were 7 questions for the focus group, or 5 questions for the focus group. So is there anything else the COG should consider? Yes, federal funds and how the region collectively leverage those funds. So they mentioned, CARES. Now CARES came really quick, as you all know. It was like July go, and then you have only until December with maybe a little bit of extension. So it's probably hard to convene a whole bunch of people and say, how can we, leverage all these funds? But there was a couple comments around ARPA funds, and if there is opportunity for the, here's some thoughts for you in terms of how multiple jurisdictions can get together to use those funds. Providing guidance on the use of federal funds when federal funds are provided, workload and feasibility of doing more. So, the good thing is that the focus group participants are concerned about, the current workload, but is it really feasible to do more work with the existing staff? Awareness of TJCOG members and other organizations. And so the last 2 things just to cover quickly, peer council of government interviews. So there were 7 questions that were asked. See the 7 questions here. So I'll give you maybe just 30 seconds to take a look at those questions. I won't read each one to you. And then I'll share with you some of the highlights. And while you're reading, I would say, I believe were there 3 or 4 peer organizations, Jenny? I have 3 highlight presentation.
There were 3 that we were able to interview, and then 4 participated with the strategic planning task force. We didn't get to Kansas City for these questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go back and look at my notes for that 4th one. Okay. All right. So very comprehensive set of questions there. And this is everything that came out. So again, I'm not going to read to you. I said I have a dense slide in there, but it's really more for you guys to kind of peruse through on your own. But I will highlight a couple of things that came out from the peer interviews. And I didn't participate in the peer interviews, but did have an opportunity to hear them speak on Monday at the steering committee. And I think all three of these organizations that are represented here are amazing. And I know Lee thinks highly of each of those leaders in those organizations. But for the Atlanta Regional Council, Doug Hooker, the executive director, he provided some really good there that things he said as a new leader, I guess they were an organization that had reputation issues in the past. And so when he came over as the executive director, he was able to help kind of shift the mindset of that particular COG and focus on the value add. He mentioned that they have a lot of strengths in their team to do research and data analytics, and they constantly put out information. He said that elected leaders know them and want that COG or that organization in the room. Mentioned some of the priorities around climate, housing, and sustainability are all connected. So it's interesting that he said they're all connected. And I think there's another one here that said, oh, these things are all connected as well. And the employees and the focus group participants are saying, how can we show the interconnectivity of all these things? He mentioned focus on innovation. He said they discussed in the past this whole notion of autonomous vehicles and what might that look like in terms of impact to the Atlanta region. He said the pitfall is not taking risk or trying something new. I don't know, I didn't get from him if he had experience where that had occurred or what, but he was just saying, I think you just have to take that risk and try something new and be brave. Culture is critical. He said virtual work is disruptive, but is thought-provoking for the organization in terms of how do we do things differently? How do we engage differently, different communities that may be different, right? And then that last comment that he made around must have a comprehensive approach with community as it relates to conversations is that he said, we recognize that there's restrictions and restraints with regulatory guidance and that sometimes our hands are tied, but let's have those open and honest conversations with our member communities so that they understand what we can and cannot do. Bay Area Metro COG, Brad Paul, he said we have a vision, a role for each community. They mentioned they have 35 strategies. They have priorities of focus on transit, housing, jobs, all connected. Also has a focus on climate resiliency with an equity and justice overlap. So that can kind of get to some of that DEI or environmental justice, which I know some communities are kind of starting to focus on now. So yes, it's about the environment, but let's look at it with a DEI lens and focus on environmental justice. He mentioned, we pilot some things as an organization. And so as a result, some people have said, oh, you're acting more like a business because you pilot, you measure, then you scale. So he was like, well, we have a good modeling team to help us do that. And so that's one of the reasons why we're actually able to probably be seen like this. Under promise, over deliver. He said there's an increasing commitment, may not necessarily pertain to the triangle area, but increasing commitment to sea level rise, change affordable housing. If you don't plan accordingly, you're doomed. You doom everything. And then it's hard to see that last bullet, but he said the dues that they charge the members do include a cost of living. And then the last person, Mid-Ohio Planning Commission, Murdoch, said they're very intentional in their work. They have a committee that focuses on local government policy and kind of wraps themselves around that. He said that their big one-offs are large regional housing plans, sustainability plans, transportation plans. For rural members, which I really like to hear them say, is that they leverage those relationships with university partners. So I'm assuming there's a university out there that they do that with, and not just community colleges or other other entities, but university partners. They conduct elected official training. They've hired grant writers and people to actually deal with the financing for any infrastructure projects so that they can consult with the member organizations. And then I guess that last bullet, MPO provides stable funding is the way that they pay their planners and overhead, and they're able to do a lot of different things like mapping and data analysis work. So no, that's very heavy. If you want me to go back to the slide when we get to the end, I can definitely do that for you. All right, and last, before we take a break, is that I just did some document reviews. Again, just one, my way of educating myself, but then also to understand what's been done before. So looked at the charter, and one of the things that stood out in the charter was a purpose statement. And that statement is what you see in quotes is to act in concert with reference to regional matters, and you can see all the things there. So some of the considerations I said is that, the purposes mirror much of the respondents, what the respondents indicated. The purposes can be included in the new or revised focus areas. So do we need to go back to some of those things that were mentioned in the charter to see if we move forward, and then the also be used to inform the mission and vision statements. Revised values. So there was, I guess, a process that was used some time ago to revise the values. Those 4 values are what you see there for the TJCOG: integrity and trustworthiness, excellent customer service, well-informed leadership, and solutions and results. There's a statement that goes along with values on DEI. So one of the things that I just noted was that there may be opportunity to change just that statement. And essentially what it's saying is these are revised values, but then here's the undercurrent, or here's kind of the cross-cutting factor, right? And it's a statement that is associated with those revised values. But if you wanted to bring in the DEI element a little more into the value statement, that could be a 5th one. So again, that's just something to consider. And also the other consideration, or the other thing that I noticed, that respondents also supported a DEI reference that is called out more in the TJCOG work. Then I looked at the annual report. In the annual report, you had those 7 focus areas there. I know they've shifted and been modified since then. So I was just saying some considerations and opportunities for the next strategic framework to provide information assistance on aging. So the aging group did share that with me, that maybe there's a way to provide more resources. So not just having that to be a focus area, but how do we do more for that community or those communities. Comprehensive economic development strategy, affordable housing, transportation, workforce development, infrastructure, land use, water, and climate change. So essentially what I did is look at what were the focus areas in 18 and 19, and then kind of crossed over into some of the themes that came out in the survey and in the employee focus, and just said what are the communities to continue some of that work that was done in 18 and 19, and then looked at the budget, just reviewed it to determine alignment to priority areas, and also looked at the organizational chart. So priority area considerations or things just to know: objectives outlined in the 4-year regional plan. So do we leverage those things up into the strategic framework a little more? This thing around food systems and food insecurity came out. But it didn't really come out in the focus groups or the employee survey. So, that was obviously something that was important in the budget document to highlight. So do we bring that more to the top and continue doing work there? Of course, climate change and environmental justice, strategy innovation network, the best use of staff for the technical assistance. So do you have the right people in the right jobs, the right people in the right seats on the bus? Coordinated efforts to address transportation in the region. So is there a greater opportunity there? And then the last thing I looked at was the area plan for aging and human services, the 2024 plan. And I just called out the focus areas there. I understand it's that group and the plan is integrated into the COGS work. So just wanted to make sure I just highlighted the areas of priority areas for that particular plan around safety and protection, quality of life, well-informed communities, and strong and seamless continuation of services. And again, continue or consider the work of DEI as it relates to ageism and as it relates to disabilities with that population. That's a lot. So a lot to digest, a lot to swallow. Anything pressing before we take a short break that I need to clarify and or go back to? Y'all still with me? Anything?
Oh, well done. It was a very good interview, overview, a lot of food for thought. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So yeah, and fire hose of information. And this is one of the reasons why in the planning work with Lee and Jenny, we said that we would come back to this group because you may after today, as we're developing the framework, say, hey, Monica, I've given a lot of thought to what you said on slide 10. Really want you to factor in X, Y, and Z as you're developing it. And it allows, again, those processors to provide additional information when we come back to you with, I guess, that first draft. So this point in time, we're a little behind, so I have to check my time. Let's go ahead and just take a 10-minute break. And we'll start back up at 10:10 and then start getting into some of the work that we'll have you guys do.
It's legendary.
those of you listening, we have about 3 minutes and we'll get started at 10:10. Thank you. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. If y'all can just give me a thumbs up and let me know that you're in the room, even if your cameras are off, or either turn your camera so I can see, that would be great. I need to get a sense of who's back. I understand you may want to be in your pajamas on this Saturday, so I get it. Okay, looks like we have the majority back. Great, thank you. Let me turn on my camera so you can see me. Okay, all right, still sipping my coffee. Okay, so that was a 10-minute break. I realized that we're a little behind, so I'm gonna try and catch us up. That next break may not be so long, so but we're almost there, going to 12 o'clock. Okay, so let's go ahead and just jump in and start focusing on the mission statement for the organization. So just a reminder in what employees have said and what those individuals that participate in focus groups have said. So I just wanted to keep it in front of you. Of course, the intent for the mission statement draft that you'll, unless you've already had a look at it, is not to force all the words that people have provided into a statement, but to more so just capture general sentiment. We know mission statements tend to be one sentence. They can be lengthy at times. So just a heads up, you will see it be a statement that's at length. But again, it's a start point for this board. Certainly we want your feedback and we want to see if you have any edits, but wanted to just kind of put this back in front of you in terms of the employees, basically saying all the things that we know that the COG does, and their focal points, which we're not necessarily calling out in the mission statement necessarily, all these things. And then the focus group participants, said again, convening, providing collaborative opportunities, sharing best practices, and reviewing other key information. So after taking that into consideration, some options provided to Lee and Jenny for reaction, and then options for the steering committee. We went ahead and came up with the statement here. So want to just clarify the difference between mission and vision. Also just failed to realize this or failed to share this or say this, but the mission statement tends to reflect the why organization exists, right? So when an organization goes to incorporate with its state as a nonprofit 501c3 or whatever the 501 status is, typically they have to offer up some type of mission statement. You know, why are you proposing to do this organization and to conduct work as this organization? So the why is hopefully what you see here. It's a member-driven organization that serves as a leading resource on regional policy, capacity and technical assistance to member organizations, and enhances and connects communities focused on addressing local and regional matters of interest. So that is the draft. I'm going to stop, and this is everybody's opportunity to provide some thoughts. We'll capture some notes. I typically don't get into wordsmithing. So if you're like, hey, I don't like that word, great, we'll note it. We'll jot it down, and we'll spend maybe about, I don't know, I'd probably say no more than like 7 to 10 minutes getting some feedback from you on the mission statement. So anybody want to jump in with their thoughts and reactions?
Hey, Monica, this is Jennifer Robinson. The only thing I'd say is that it's kind of long. It's
Okay.
not, the mission statement is succinct enough that somebody can remember it and be able to kind of convey it quickly to their peers. Like, you know, who is the COG? Oh, the COG is, you know,
Yeah.
and be able to say it kind of fast.
Okay, thank you for that. Other thoughts, word choices, additions of words. Jennifer talked about the length. Okay, I'll ask another way. Anybody hate it? Just, you're like, I absolutely don't like this. We only have one participant?
Monica, it's Bob Smith, and
Yes,
I do
sir.
work with words, so I guess I'm okay with wordsmithing. But
Okay.
the third line there, regional policy capacity and technical assistance. Are we saying regional capacity, or what does capacity mean in that phrase?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's, you know, having the appropriate capacity to provide the technical assistance to member organizations. But if we need to phrase it a little so it's clear, we can definitely do that. And or, you know, consider a different word from capacity. Thank you, Bob, for that.
Monica, this is Adriana, and I would say this, it looks great to me. It covers the gambit, and I think it gives a very clear understanding.
Okay. Thank you. Other thoughts? And not everybody has to speak, but I want to make sure that allow for time to people to read it, process it, and offer their 2 cents.
This is Sally from Orange County. I agree with Deidreana that it's accurate. I also agree that if we could have you could keep this, but in addition have a shorthand version that's not quite so detailed, but still accurate, that we could kind of memorize and be able to say when anybody says, what's the COG? Because I'm not going to memorize this one.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that goes back to Jennifer's comment. So, okay, thank you for that.
Hey, Monica, this is Brett from Apex.
Hey.
I'm wondering if the order of what's written here is wrong. I think the thing about connecting communities is the #1 thing that happens here. And so maybe a suggestion would be to switch the order where you say TJCOG connects communities or whatever things in the bottom by serving as a resource for the regional policy capacity thing.
Okay.
Emphasize that first part a little bit more.
Yeah.
Connecting communities. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That's good feedback. Okay, other thoughts? Okay, all right. I don't want to take time just to take time. So I heard that it's kind of lean. It's going to be hard to remember it. I think that there was a couple comments around that. So either consider shortening statement and or providing some type of shorthanded version that kind of you can put in your pocket and go. Maybe that 10-second elevator speech version. Bob had mentioned the word capacity. What do we mean by that? So there may be opportunity there to shift that around. There were a couple of people that said, yeah, general support. And then Brett said, maybe we can switch the wording around. So what we'll do is, and this is what we did the first time to the steering committee with 2 options. So for the steering committee that's on this call, when we meet the next time, I'll present 2 options and then get your feedback. It's ultimately going to be the decision of the board if you want a longer version that is easy to remember. How do we balance that? Or if you want like a what I would say a statement and then a narrative. And so maybe that would get to, the shorthand version, ask, balancing with a longer. And so we'll play around with that and provide some recommendations to the steering committee. So, all right, thank you for that. Okay, so going over to the vision statement. So our goal is to have a good mission and vision statement for the COG. So the vision statement, just as a reminder, what people were saying is, they're the leader, they're the thought leader, they're the go-to. They've created this comprehensive approach. They're a regional hub for all issues, right? That was what the employees were saying. And then in terms of the focus group, similar go-to organization. They would have kept up with the landscape, having the optimal staff, answering the question why it's important, what's in it for me, so on and so forth. And so with that, we took feedback as well, sat with a little bit and kind of phrase it in the will be. I know that's passive tense, but it's okay sometimes with vision statements since it's a forward look. So what you see here is a triangle. TJCOG will be a premier organization that addresses the needs of member organizations by providing comprehensive, innovative, timely, and reliable practices, both holistically and uniquely. So the holistically gets to kind of the regional aspect, but without, it gets to impart the regional aspect, but without out the word region. And it also gets to what maybe member organizations are doing where they have multiple things that they're trying to address and they need a holistic view, technical assistance maybe to address those things holistically. And then the unique needs of the member organization. So, we recognize that there's going to be maybe some regional things. Then how do we still embrace that Monica's organization has unique needs that are very different from the other 45? And then we want to meet the needs of the region and the nation. So, the last piece of the nation is really just saying, the COG is to be seen beyond just the region and just with the member organizations as a premier organization, but it's really to be seen across the nation. So when they went out and interviewed those peer COG organizations, those organizations are nationally known, for a lot of their best practices. So anyway, more forward look, answers the question of the what the organization wants to be, and that what supports the why. So to have a mission statement is why do you exist, and then what do you want to be and what do you want to do is the vision statement piece. So I'll stop. Any thoughts, reactions to the vision statement draft?
This is Bob again. In a way, if you replace will with is, will be with is, that almost is a better statement than the prior one.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So just claim it. All right. Did I see a couple other hands up? Maybe those hands went down. Okay, the hands weren't up. Any other thoughts? Anybody hate it? Anybody love it?
This is Jennifer Robinson. I love it.
Thanks for the heart. Latacious. Thanks, Kirk. All right. Got some party favors over there. All right, thanks, Bill. Okay. I was always taught in when I was teaching in my early days, I started teaching in 2010, that you give students, I think like 8 seconds is what they say, for facilitators, trainers, and educators to allow people to get their thoughts together and get it out there. So don't want to rush through this, but any other thoughts? Anything we need to consider? Any word choices, word changes? Okay. All right, pretty easy breezy. Again, you'll have a second opportunity to look at this. Sounds like we may just need to tweak this a little bit as opposed to coming up with several options. So steering committee, I'm gonna move forward with this one and factor in Bob's word choice and then get your thoughts. And, you know, first we'll share it back with the board. And I don't, Jenny and or Lee, do y'all have to adopt the mission and vision statements? So will that be the ask of the board at the, I guess, second time we come back to them? I'm assuming so.
Yes, eventually we would be asking the board to adopt the mission and vision statements. Yes.
And would that go also be just the full strategic framework as well?
That's
okay.
correct.
All right,
Yes.
I see. Okay. So that will be the ask, board members. Okay. All right, so we're gonna move on. Okay, so I know there's a lot going on this slide. So I went ahead and put into the chat box the questions that you see down below. So you can kind of keep them in front of you if you're not looking at the PowerPoint slide deck or the PDF shared with you via, I believe, SharePoint folder. But we want to revisit the focus areas and just make sure that these are timely, relevant, that they're clear, they're capturing what the TJCOG should focus on. And when we decided to ask individuals to chime in on the focus areas, it wasn't necessarily because we were trying to correct an issue or there was a problem we were trying to solve for with the focus areas. But I think just like in any good strategic planning work, you're doing your due diligence, you're going back and saying, okay, do these really reflect the things that we need to care about? And so with that, it's thinking about what should be as part of the framework for the next 3 to 5 years. So if you can kind of rise up and say, yes, today these things are really important, but are they also going to still be important in the next 3 to 5 years? As a reminder, general sentiment and feedback reaction from focus group participants that were those 4 focus groups and the employees was that these are good. They shouldn't be deleted. There were some suggestions for modification that I highlighted earlier and or clarity in the definition. So what I'd like to do now is go through each one of these and stop, pause, get your thoughts, reactions for word changes. Some of them are, I believe, 1 or 2 sentences. So I'll really give you some time to just what you see in front of you. And the goal will be to go through all 7. But before we do that, the first 2 questions I think are important for us to just kind of sit with. So 1, should any of these be completely restructured? So, you know, we did hear some of the feedback where individuals were saying, you know, maybe strategy and innovation and technical assistance should be folded into the other 5. Any additions to the focus areas? You know, we heard a lot about climate change. Of course, I could go into the natural resources and resilience one. We heard about, you know, AI should be a thread throughout, as people were suggesting. Of course, that's up to this board to decide if that's the case. So does anybody have any, I guess, heartburn with the 7? Is there something that somebody wants to put into this room as it relates to either adding to, deleting, restructuring? Yes, Commissioner Butch?
See, there we go. Let me make sure I hit all the buttons. I did have one question, and maybe Lee can help with this. So transportation, I know we have MPOs and RPOs. What is the difference? Or are we having duplication of effort when we throw transportation in there? I need a little help with why we're focusing on transportation as one of our top 7 when we have organizations who do that already.
Sure, I think it's a great question. So we do a lot of work in transportation. So as an example, Go Triangle and the MPOs use us, us to basically administer the entire transportation demand management program for the entire region. So that's one thing that we do. We do staff the RPO for more Lee, Chatham, and part of Orange County. So we run that. We do quite a bit of work, which is probably not as known, but I think it's really important and might be important about sort of thinking about the future. We get quite a bit of money from the MPOs to actually help coordinate the two MPOs. So Campo and the Durham Chapel Hill MPO, we convene their staffs every 2 weeks. We actually serve as the data sort of center point for doing all the data work so that they can have a combined long-range transportation plan. We work on a lot of transportation-oriented design work for Go Triangle. We convene the two MPO policy boards. I think it's every quarter, so we do the work around that. So there's a lot of work that we do. We do safe routes to school work, a lot of work we do in transportation and helping to support the MPOs, run the RPO and support Go Triangle as well.
Okay, well, it's many years I've been on here. I learned something this Saturday morning. So I mean, I knew there was some involvement. I just didn't know to the extent. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, sir. Brett, I'm not sure who went first for Brett, but Brett.
I think Jennifer was actually next. So.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
I don't mind if Brett wants. It's okay. I'll just ask this quick question. Those 3 peer organizations that we looked at, are they taking on any responsibilities that we think would be applicable to our region that we'd say, okay, we look at them, they're doing this and we ought to be doing it too?
That's a great question. I can't recall immediately without going back to my notes, but Lee, did you whenever? Let me go back and see.
Yeah, so a couple things. Kansas City does a lot of really interesting work around emergency management and public safety for their local government members. The other thing that all 4 do is they are the MPOs for the region as well. I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm just putting that out.
You're just making that observation. Okay. All righty.
Correct.
Lee, from your perspective, there's nothing burning that you're saying, we really need to get into this space that you see.
The one area that I do have some interest in, and I think we could make an impact in if we had the capacity to do it, is that public safety emergency management area. Mm-hmm. I think there's quite a bit of opportunity there for coordination. We just don't have capacity right now to do it.
I was trying to see, I thought that came up somewhere. Employees. Yeah. So focus areas that they didn't necessarily provide the why, but focus area considerations, emergency services, public safety came up as some additional ones by the employee. Didn't really come up in the focus groups though. But let me go back with some areas for consideration. No, it didn't come up for the focus group participants. I think, and then I was looking at the 3 here, and I know Lee just talked to Kansas City. They didn't mention that as well, but, it could be one of those things too, where if you do decide to go down that path of emergency management and public safety, you could recognize as a focus area. And then as part of your strategic framework, the first year is really spent, okay, what does this really mean for us, right? So it's almost like a focus area under development, but you're putting it out there publicly as part of the release of your framework to say this, we believe this is emerging enough for us to at least start thinking about it. So that's a way for, I know in planning world where people are like, hey, we don't quite have it scoped out yet, but we are interested. And the other thing I'll say, when you go back to your charter, safety is mentioned in there, just as safety, not public safety, but that could be, if it does get added to your set of focus areas, then it's already in some form or fashion recognized in your charter. So I was just trying to pull all the pieces together based on that question, Jennifer. Sorry. Good question. Okay, and then Brett.
Thanks. Yeah. When I look at this list of areas, I see, and it was mentioned before, land use as spanning a lot of these areas. And Lee, I was intrigued by the question to the other MPOs about the question 7 about the regional planning being incorporated. And I would be a strong advocate for that, because I feel like, we have these planning organizations split down the middle of our region, and we have the RPO and the other part of TJCOG, and a cohesive look of that, I think, would facilitate what I consider the major projects that we're going to have regarding transportation and other things related to that. It would facilitate it to have it all on one roof. And so I think, I'm wondering why, if that's kept us back a little bit on our, especially I'm thinking about transit in particular, but yeah, I think the land use, and the staff mentioned that too. I think the land use is a big part of these things that I think it's an important aspect going forward, and maybe not to add to the list, but at the very least think about as an overarching thing is land use and combining the MPOs together.
Well, I think, Brett, your point is well taken, because when I think about, I think I share this at the steering committee, or maybe I shared it with just Lee and Jenny, but I'm down here in Charlotte, right? And North Carolina being one of the fastest growing states in the nation, especially if they're in a triangle area, I think you do have to think about land use and regional planning, and be a little more intentional with that, right? I shared with our elected officials some time ago that said, I think by 2040, I think it's 2040, it's going to be 50% of the United States population is going to be within 8 states. And one of those 8 states is North Carolina. So if you're talking about the nation and a chunk of people moving here, and we know the growth rate is out of control, even in a pandemic, I think you have to, that's my personal opinion. I think it has to be recognized some way, somehow. But whether this board decides that it's a new focus area or not, yeah, that's going to be left up to y'all. But I think your point is well taken there. Other thoughts? This is good feedback.
I think Commissioner Carter has her hand up.
Sorry, I lost my
okay.
view of y'all again.
No problem.
No, that's okay.
Thanks.
Well, I first of all want to say, I think the comments about more of a focus on regionalism are spot on. It seems like one of the hardest things to do. It's hard enough to get it right in our own local counties, but I know in Durham, we're about to, adopt a Durham transit plan, and we really have got to think regionally and locally, and how to sequence the projects so that the funding is there for it. And so anyway, I think that really is a role for the TJCOG, and just figuring out how to best do that. I was paying a lot of attention to the comments from the focus groups and from staff about the equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and whether that should be pulled out as a separate area of focus, or whether actually it should be the overarching area of focus in each one of these areas that we have currently listed. Every time we make any kind of decision about them, think about, well, what is the impact on equity? And the same thing could be said about the climate. That was mentioned several times, that maybe we needed to add climate. We could either add it, as you said, perhaps within the resilience category, or it could also be something that within each of these areas, transportation, housing, really every decision we make, we need to think about now, what is the impact on climate and greenhouse gas emission and sustainability. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is the food systems and food security. Are we going to pull that out, or is that built into one of these, perhaps natural resources and resilience? But you mentioned it was lifted up in the budget, I think, and I do think we need help with that. Regional food system planning. There again, it's really hard to get it done just within your county, thinking about your county food system and how it affects equity. And anyway, I would support doing something more official there too.
Thank you, Heidi, for your feedback. And yeah, when we get into, climate is called out a little bit in, I believe, the natural resources. So when I walk through each one of these, and that's probably after, I guess, Sally's comment, and then looks like Ronnie. So I'll get Sally and Ronnie, and then we'll go through each one of these and see where some of the things that you guys are sharing with me now may need to be lifted up if they're not already within the descriptions. What was happening is that employees and focus group participants were saying, these are great, but I think, these things need to be considered. So it's almost like they were offering up some suggestions that may already be in the definitions, but this is our opportunity to kind of gut check that and then to add, language and or modify language as needed. But again, we'll get into wordsmithing, but we can certainly call it out if it's not called out in certain spaces, Heidi, at least for consideration. So thank you for that. I'll take Sally and then Ronnie, and then I'll walk you guys through.
Thank you. I want to just ditto and underscore the comments that Heidi just made, particularly about 2 or 3 points. One is Orange County is also revising its transit plan, and both Durham and Orange are having to do that in the wake of the lack of implementation of the light rail that had been planned. So it's certainly incumbent on us to keep cooperating to come up with an alternative to that. In terms of transportation more broadly, I think the COG can play a role in whenever possible, emphasizing the connection, the essential connection between transit and land use planning. I think a lot of local elected officials understand that connection, but a lot of other people don't, and have this idea that, efficient bus service needs to go to every corner of every rural part of every county, for example. So I know that in our transit plan, and I'm the co-chair of our policy steering committee, we do make that strong connection, but it's going to be some work to sell everyone else to on that strong connection. So I'm seeing a role that the COG could play in underscoring that. And then I also want to support the notion that food systems is an important area that the COG that has to be regional, and we already have some strong local food councils and work going on. So, and I know the COG knows this, but I just want to put in a plug for really strengthening that work.
Thank you so much, Sally. Ronnie?
Yeah, just circle back a second to safety, Lee. I know thinking back, we've done some safety stuff over the years. I know we talked one time about having a safety training center that the COG was kind of heavily involved in. And I know we did some testing for safety officers and stuff. And I think recently, we've done some recruiting for safety, maybe police officers and retainment for some of the communities was having, difficulty retaining their officers and stuff. And that's still going on, I think. But I think we have done some stuff along public safety. Are you kind of saying that we had some more staff we could take that further?
Yes, excuse me. Yes, I think with some capacity, there are some opportunities around looking at regional hazard mitigation and resiliency training, maybe helping with working even more around those recruitment issues. The fire chiefs have expressed interest in maybe working together around recruitment. And I just think there's lots of opportunities. And just as you look at peer COGs, and I know Washington, D.C. may or may not be a good example, but we've looked at them. They do a lot of interesting things around public safety and have 10 staff members working on regional public safety issues. Kansas City is another good example that they have several staff members. So yes, I think with some capacity, we could probably do some really interesting work in emergency management and public safety.
Yeah, just to put you on the spot a little bit, so you think it should be added here where, in the future, when we're developing annual work plans and stuff, we can talk about staffing possibilities and things like that? Or, if it's a need, I agree. I think we have done a little bit in the past, and I feel like we probably could do more along, public safety. Just trying to figure out how do we proceed with that,
You know, if I don't have a vote, but if I did, yeah, I think you've heard about food systems and you've heard about public safety. I think those are the two areas that I've heard the most about, and there seemed to be the most energy around perhaps doing something with, and I would say the same thing around food systems. We know it's an issue. We want to do something where we've been looking for funding. We just haven't hit yet where we can find funding and beef up capacity. So I would say those are the two that come to mind.
Yeah, it brings up interesting point because, you know, a lot of times, you know, this group's staffing is kind of dependent on funding from, you know, different things. So along public safety, there's not that much in funding that, you know, we could try to get anything like that.
Well, we actually have a piece of good news, and we haven't figured out yet exactly how it's going to work, but we did get a state appropriation. As my camera dies, I've been having problems with my camera, so I'm not just sort of in freeze frame. We did get some money from the state budget, so we may have an opportunity to at least try to pilot something. There are other issues, and it goes to the regional bifurcation. FEMA likes to look at our region as two different regions because they like to do their work based on MSAs. So it's been very difficult to get FEMA maybe to look at us as a unified region for like a very large urban area security initiative, which other larger metros have access to. But yeah, I think some capacity could get us down the road to maybe trying to work on some of those issues regionally.
Thank you for your thoughts there, Ronnie. Commissioner Butch, it looks like you raised your hand again, and then after you, we'll step through each of these. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I had a similar comment to Ronnie's, and I'd actually sent Lee a message, but along the public safety and particularly our case, we paid for a really bad report, unfortunately, and something like that where we had some commonality across our region and people looking at, in our case, it was a fire study, but you know, some way for us to have a source that we can go to that we know will be quality once it gets there, that we don't have to, you know, attempt to find something and find out that it was ultimately a failure, and we're going to have to probably do it again. But I think the public safety sector would be something to look at for all the reasons that everybody's already mentioned, but specifically for us, we just had a recent bad experience with a consultant. So I think I would expect a higher quality from Triangle J than we definitely got. So
Sorry, it's such a huge issue. I learned early on budget and public safety are the two big things in government that you need to be aware of. So sorry to hear that. Okay, thank you all for your good comments at the kind of 30,000 foot level. So what I would like to do is just again walk through each of these as they are, because it sounds like there wasn't anybody that said, you know, throw this out, or I really propose this, or, you know, what have you. For the ones that we would add, we would take a look at what that looks like. Of course, that would extend these from 7 to potentially 8 or 9, and just kind of play with that a little bit and see how it shakes out. I don't think the public safety and the food stuff can get into these other areas, but again, we'll play with that a little bit. And so for the steering committee, that will be a big decision point for the committee is, what do you want to support when it comes to these updated focus areas? Because it sounds like we will be going down that path of making a suggestion to add either 1 or 2. And so we'll really be looking for your feedback there, but we'll try and get you something way in advance of the steering committee meeting that you can just peruse through and kind of think through with the definitions. And then that way, when I meet with you, you could be prepared to provide that feedback. So given that all of these that are on this slide will more than likely go forward in some form or fashion, I want to just break each one of these down and get broad reactions and thoughts to the focus area name, which sounds like it may remain intact, but also the descriptor that you see there. So the 3 questions below focus on that description. So any additions or deletions, additional word elements, and then what other focus area or concept should this focus area be linked to or connected to in the strategic framework? So, we heard from the participants, the employees, as well as focus group participants, that we need to show better connection. I believe when the aging group, they had said housing is really important for us to also consider as it relates to the work that we do. They were saying we do, as well as transportation. So I'm going to link those two, but I'll stop and see if there's any thoughts, and maybe we can manage time. So maybe we can take no more than 5 minutes for the 7 total. Then we can get through this and then get on to organizational priorities, and you guys will be free to go. So any reactions or thoughts or anything we need to consider here as it relates to this focus area?
This is Jennifer Robinson. I have a question. It says, and help local communities design communities. When we say help local communities, are those in some way other than our member governments? Because if so, I would change that to say, and help members design communities.
Lee?
I think Ms. Robson makes a good point. Our work has been with member governments on like aging community friendly plans. A lot to say. So yes.
Okay. Yeah, that provides a little more transparency and clarity for the consumer of the statement. So yeah, thank you for that. Any other thoughts?
Monica, can you see the notes that are being put in? Because Deidreana put in.
I'm sorry.
In the chat, Deidreana.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was on the previous slide for the food systems and the public safety, just thinking about how community development works right now. It's very limited. So
okay. Thank you for that. And we will capture all the notes that are provided in the chat. And I won't have an opportunity to read all of those things, but we will take that feedback into consideration as well. But just again, to call out the older adults, to connecting older adults to resources. And there was a lot of comments around how do we provide greater resources to them. So, in either the program work or the specific tactics that may support this particular focus area, we want to make sure that resources is specified in terms of what might be the needs within the community. Randy?
Yes, thank you, Monica. I'm wondering if at the end of the paragraph, if we would want to add, after help local communities design communities that are livable for community members of all ages and support aging in community, because the term aging in community is really one of the key values that I know in our Orange County we've been working to underscore.
Okay. So you said, and something after, of course, we'll wordsmith that because I know that's a long sentence.
Yeah.
But after age, go ahead.
Design communities that are livable for community members of all ages and support aging in community.
Okay, thank you. All right. Maybe
hi, this is Ken Marshburn. I have a general question for Lee, and we probably don't need to get in a long discussion on it, but I'm wondering, is the Meals on Wheels program just kind of a separate entity that I guess it functions on its own, does well? I'm a volunteer for that and have a lot of respect for the program, but is that an area that Triangle J would have any interest in at all, or maybe a discussion for another day? Thank you.
No, thank you. And the way these services work in North Carolina, and then particularly for Triangle J, is we provide sort of the framework and then help facilitate passing through the money, and then the local communities make the decisions on how the funds are being spent. And so, yes, Mayor, in Wake County and many of the other counties, a lot of the money that we pass through are used for home delivered meals, congregate meals. So we help monitor all that. But in North Carolina, the area agencies on aging typically do not get into actually delivering the service. We contract with nonprofit agencies and work with the local councils on aging to do that. So we do have a hand in the Meals on Wheels by helping to provide the funding and doing the monitoring, but not necessarily in the service delivery.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you for that insight. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
That's all I have for now.
Thank you so much, Ken. Okay, if you have any other thoughts, please, on this one, please put in the chat. So we'll go to the second one, community and economic development. And I don't know if I made this clear. I know we have some new board members with us, but these statements are the existing statements. So I didn't change it. I didn't modify. We didn't modify as a steering committee, but they are what's in place right now. So that was one of the reasons we wanted us to revisit. So this is your community economic development. I'll let you take a second to read through that and provide any feedback or thoughts. And while you're reading through, several comments, of course, came out from the employees as well as the focus group participants and the importance of this one. There wasn't any, or there were not any comments split it out, split community away from economic development. I think the only comment as it relates to this one was to put housing within community economic development, but I think it makes it less transparent if you would merge that focus area within this one. But there was general support with this focus area. When you're ready, jump in. See if I see hands. I can't see y'all, but I can see hands in the chat box. I mean, in the participant box. Any thoughts? You're generally good.
Hold on. I think this is specifically where I was saying that the food systems and the public safety, along with housing, could all be engulfed in this. I know for Durham, we've been talking about community health and safety. And I think because they all run together, similarly with the aging, it's probably a good space to probably expand a little further, because the economic development that drives in our community is going to include housing, it's going to include food systems, and it's going to include our public safety. I mean, so it's just a suggestion, but I think expanding it a little further and acknowledging that this is probably the area of growth that we all want to see in our communities, or I know for us to do, but we want to make sure that we do it in a way that folks are healthy and safe. And so that livability piece is in there, the just all the elements of how we want to live in community together safely.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do remember that being a comment of yours. And yeah, there may be a way so that food systems and food insecurity is so niched. If that doesn't become a standalone focus area, there'd probably be a way to incorporate it in here, especially with, local farmers markets and trust farms and all kinds of creative and innovative things that are going on. At least I know here locally, because we have food insecurity or food security concerns. And nationwide, there may be a way to embed it in there, because it could tie especially specifically to that community and economic development. So,
I would just add the one other additional piece in that it's probably along the lines of building in this, like in rewriting it, if we did rewrite it, there would need to be some element of stability or sustainability in that as well. So,
okay. Yeah. Sustainability. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right. We're going to move to the third one. And again, I'll go back and read anything that's coming in the chat box. This is the housing one. Of course, the keywords and things that came out were around affordable housing. I think a connection point is housing and workforce development. We did get some really good comments around that, especially with if we're say the research triangle, right? Research area, and trying to attract people for jobs and things like that, where we need to have, appropriate workforce housing. So that bottom question down there will be, one of the things that I show as a linkage point, because those two things are definitely tying in together. But the key words that people had brought up around housing are generally reflect. But any other thoughts or any thoughts around this one? And then the other connection point, of course, is transportation. Sally?
Yeah, I'm interested in the phrase "meet communities where they are," because I think that recognizes that we're all in very different places, but that phrase also makes me kind of sad, because I think what we should be doing is helping to structure a regional vision of housing. And I know that this board has talked about that a couple of years ago, and maybe it's just too difficult. I don't know, but it certainly remains a dream in my eyes somehow.
Yeah, that's appropriate perception. Lee, do you know the background of that element in this statement around meeting communities where they are? Was it to recognize the unique needs of communities, or?
Yes. I think we have, with our 46 communities, we have communities that are in a lot of different places in terms of where they are and with affordable housing strategies. And so, so we try to focus that on sort of where communities are at that point of time. We do a number of different things. And I agree with Commissioner Green. I think having a regional housing strategy would be a great thing for us to pursue. We're trying to look for funding opportunities to actually do a regional transportation and housing strategy, along with land use. And it may sound like a broken record. It comes down to funding and capacity for us. A lot of our housing team is supported only by specific projects that we're able to get. And so having enough capacity to really work on a regional housing plan just is very difficult. And I guess the other thing I'll say is because we're a voluntary organization, not all local governments are as willing to work with us as others. And so we certainly try to work with all, but not all local governments sort of are as willing to let us work with them as others are. So it makes putting a regional strategy sometimes difficult to put together.
Yeah, and it could be, Sally, to your point, it could be just, modifying the words, right? So don't want to get into wordsmith, but, fund administration to meet communities' needs, right, and housing, right?
Yeah.
So
I think that's better, just to move away from that phrase while not necessarily committing to a regional plan.
Yeah. And then, it could also be like Lee said, the challenges with the regional plan, either in this statement or in some other communication tool, talking about exploring the feasibility, right? So if you explore the feasibility, then you're testing to see if it's even possible before you say, create a regional housing plan. So I think there's ways to kind of recognize the limitations and the challenges of the COG with regards to that, but also get to what some of the comments were. A lot of the comments were around, have a regional housing focus of some sort. So anyway, but thank you for that feedback. We'll go with Bill and then Adriana, and then I'll move us forward.
Great, thank you. I think one of the things when I look at housing and how it ties directly in with the economic development, it also ties directly in with access to clean water, because when we're looking at some of the mega sites that we have, and we have one here in the Siler City area. And one of the big questions is, okay, if we're going to bring a plant here, where are my employees going to live? And having a housing plan tied directly to your economic development, I think it's sort of table stakes.
Thank you for that. Deidreana?
Along those similar lines, not exactly the same, but I was going to say that it's more, the focus area even is more broad. It's more land use. And I think it incorporates elements of the transportation piece, because if you don't have transportation, how do you make it affordable? If you don't have jobs, how do you make it affordable? And so just noting, like, if we were talking more regional land use, it also includes elements of our water conversation. It includes elements of kind of air quality. And so I think that it could be broader, but
yeah. No, yeah. I mean, we just shared some stuff with our elected officials last week around transportation and air quality and congestion and housing. And we said, with affordable housing issues we're seeing here, people are being forced out of Mecklenburg to surrounding communities, which means they have to commute in to Mecklenburg County for work, which is a housing, transportation, air quality issue, right? So we don't have a really good transit system here.
And then just additionally thinking, as we're strategically moving in this direction, we have to account for the technology adjustments that are being made. And so acknowledging that drones are going to be a big factor in the next 5 years. It's not necessarily transportation or housing, but it is air, water, and land, like all of those things. Just trying to make sure that we're not closing ourselves off into just housing, but really kind of like regionally, how do we feel about land use, and what could be some, technical assistance that could be offered to communities that don't necessarily have 5 or 6 planners that could be focused on how to develop a drone, policy or what have you.
Yep. It's also becoming an issue here. So thank you. Okay. We'll move on to the
Just one more question, if I could, or comment, I guess it would be. So should one assume that the regional housing plan automatically encompasses the concern and concept of homelessness? In some ways, it seems like almost a branch off issue, but I'm not sure. As a region, I think for many of us who are not in large areas, my city is growing larger, and it's not a significant problem. But I'd be curious to know if there's a capacity to study the issue of homelessness. I hear about veterans being homeless and other people groups, but obviously it relates to housing. But maybe it's enough of a separate issue whether or not it should be identified as a topic itself, or if it's included under the general umbrella of regional housing and affordable housing, then that would be reasonable as well, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's the first time that's come up in all of this work. But yeah, my initial recommendation thought is to bring it into here, not just because there's the mention of affordable housing, but many communities, to include my own, are looking at housing and homelessness as kind of a comprehensive strategy. Workforce housing, people that can barely afford housing, but they're working and not necessarily in poverty or not work, so I think it's kind of all connected, but there may be a way to bring that into the mix of this statement so that's at least called out. And of course, Lee, I'm not committing or anything like that, but, that may be for further discussion with me and you to see if it makes sense to put in here, but that's my initial gut reaction to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, moving right along. All right, natural resources and resilience. So here's where, well, first of all, there's a lot of feedback on resilience and, clean air, clean water, all of that type of stuff. So, if you kind of look through this statement, you can see resilient actually comes up several times. I think it's like 3 times I see the word resilient. Environmental change is in there, I guess, which could align to the climate change and things like that, but we're not necessarily specifically calling out climate. So that may be the opportunity to modify this statement. But any thoughts, reactions, questions?
I think this is good. I mean, I do think that probably that statement about however every community is only resilient as its neighbor could be woven in a little bit better. I would like us, one thing that's important to me is for us to consider the COG's role as far as waste removal and what we're doing with waste across our region. And I've talked to Lee about this before, but I think it would probably fall under this. And it looks like it's covered under that last sentence, projects that improve the sustainability of community design and services.
Thank you, Jennifer. Randy, I believe.
Yeah, first, thank you, Jennifer, for calling out waste and waste diversion. I wanted to point out that I think it's really important to name climate action as part of sustainability. I think the omission of climate action would be not recognizing all the work that's being done regionally in the name of climate action. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Other thoughts? Bob, you about to say something?
One of the real issues for a local community affected by a hurricane or a similar disaster is the delay that it takes before FEMA, for instance, provides any funding to help the community bounce back. So I'm wondering if we ought to incorporate something about fiscal planning for that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, because even with the delay, you get reimbursed. It's like 75%, not 100%, right? That's also a challenge for communities.
Right.
But yeah, that makes sense. Fiscal planning in some form or fashion, and add that in there. Okay. Before we move on, I think we got two more, two, three. Okay. Strategy and innovation.
I just want to make sure I noted in the chat, and I probably should say it out loud, that just acknowledging that the bill brought up the broadband piece, and it could probably fit into the sustainability and the resilience. Just acknowledging that our rural neighbors without broadband, these types of meetings can occur, and that's not healthy for our region.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, and some people in focus groups mentioned digital divide, digital inclusion. Okay, I've noted that. All righty. Strategy and innovation. And I'd be interested to hear if we're good in keeping this as separate, or should it be folded in? I think it's transparent that it's called out as a separate focus group, focus area. But I do know that there was some focus group participants and employees around if this is something that should be considered elsewhere. So that's really the only thing there around this particular focus area. Okay, hearing none. Move on. Okay, technical assistance. And the only thing I think with this one, if I can recall, is just a couple comments. It wasn't throughout both the groups in terms of just came up a lot, but the lack of clarity around technical assistance. But in fairness to those individuals that provided commentary, they were just saying, I don't necessarily have the specifics in front of me, i.e. the descriptor. So they were just saying, if I just look at it at the surface, I'm not clear on what technical assistance means. So I think they just wanted a little more feedback or insight rather as it relates to what we're really talking about. But outside of that, there was no heartburn with a focus on it. Do you have any thoughts or reactions? Questions? Okay, hearing none. All right, and then the last one, transportation. I'll let you read that for a second. We have any feedback, thoughts? In the prior slide, version should be a version. Thank you, Bob, for that. I'm assuming so.
Monica, I would just say that just to put a pinpoint on the comment about the community development section, if it did expand, I think that they play a part across the board, and it might be worth having a larger focus area that's encompassing transportation, housing, economic development, sustainability.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm a little bit slow here. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Under either technical assistance or the strategy and innovation, I think we need to call out the fact that we can provide the data mapping and analysis that you see those other COGs providing for their members. I know in particular, MORPC and the Atlanta region, COG, Doug Hooker, they're doing a lot in that area. And I think that's one area that we could step up and really help provide resources. I don't see it specifically called out in it either, so I don't even know which one it would fall under. Would it be technical assistance or would it be under strategy and innovation? But
yeah,
I think it is such an essential way of doing business now, and so many of our member organizations don't have the capacity to do it. This is a real area that the COG could step up into.
Okay. Yep. Data mapping, data visualization, governments that can't afford to do it are picking up in that as well, so that they can empower people to look at data and draw, conclusions about what the data is saying. But yeah, there's definitely a movement going on in that space. So
yeah,
okay.
and so much of the data that's necessary to run our governments is actually data that's shared between governments. So the COG could play a unique role there.
Oh yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for that. So any other thoughts with transportation? I know Deidreana made a couple comments there. Anything else to consider here? Okay. So let me just go back and just make sure, just really quickly, and I know the next slide, I think I'm going to roll through that, Alicia. You can take your self breaks. You know what they say when you do virtual engagements, just go ahead and take a break as you see fit, because I want to make sure we have time for the last segment. But before we move over to organizational priorities, anything that we may have missed as part of the discussion, I got a lot of good notes and a lot of good feedback. But anything that anybody wants to say, feels compelled to say, and or didn't provide in the chat. Okay. All right, we'll move on. And Kathleen, are you good? I won't ask the board chair. Are we good with moving through the break, or do you want to give a hard break? I just assume.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time got some bandwidth. So can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Yes. No, let's move on, and we're good.
Okay. All right, thanks. I was just imposing that on y'all. I guess I should ask the board chair what she wants to do. Okay, so the last thing that we just want to cover today, and there's a lot going on here, so certainly if you have thoughts after today, just like with anything, you could send those thoughts to Lee. But for organizational priorities, so we have the focus areas, right? So the big buckets. And the organizational priorities is kind of like a layer down from that, but it could reflect work across multiple focus areas, if that makes sense. So if you look at the current org priorities, kind of uses, as I think about them, guiding principles. Service to members, all 7 apply. Diversity, equity, inclusion, to some extent, can be applied to all 7. Data-driven decision-making can be applied to all 7. But we kind of want to expand that maybe a little bit and get your thoughts around those 4 questions. So what might be key considerations or initiatives for lead to consider program of work? Are there current initiatives that you think, yes, we need to continue focusing on those? From the peer COG organizations, any priorities we need to consider there. They did share with us their priorities or their focus area equivalents. And is there any other information that we need to consider when developing the organizational priorities? So I know there's 4 questions on this one slide. I'm not going to walk through each one of those, but I do want to hear from, if possible, the majority of the people on the call, because I think this is where we get into a little more granularity with the strategic framework that should be informed by, I would say, the majority of the board. So I'm going to stop there and see if anybody wants to kind of jump in or, tell me, hey, Monica, I'm thinking about it. Give me a second, come back to me. But want to hear from you as it relates to the organizational priorities. Again, we're setting the strategic framework, so it's not necessarily saying we're going to do this first, second, third, fourth. It's really more so just kind of what is our North Star, and then we'll go from there and determine what makes sense to do in what order. So you can think about the priorities as it relates to your organizational needs, the needs of the COG, or the needs of the region. Do I have any takers? And maybe to start, let's start with the current organizational priorities. So for those 3, should we continue to focus on those? We did get, and while you guys are thinking about the questions, we did get some feedback, and I'll go back. So apologize for skipping back several slides, but there was some feedback around the priorities. So here. So we got feedback from employees and some of the themes that came out. So maybe that helps jog your memory a little bit. But again, collaborative regional planning, leadership sustainability, DEI, but with a lens on ageism, focusing on youth, having greater knowledge of employees as it relates to DEI, prioritization of collaboration opportunities, multiple disciplinary opportunities, and workforce development. So that's the feedback that we got on the current org priorities. So with that, I'll go back to where we were. Apologize, close your eyes. There. Okay. So back on the current organizational priorities. Thumbs up, thumbs down, maybe, not sure.
Hey, Monica, this is Jennifer. Silence kills me. I'm sorry. So
no, that's okay. Good time. Oh, okay, and I see Heidi. Okay.
I like the priority, the organizational priorities that we have. I do agree with Brett that if we were to bring something else in, land use planning, comprehensive land use planning for across the region would be incredibly valuable. I would say my observation is it's not what we're doing. Maybe we need to just keep improving on how we do it. And my biggest observation is that in the time that I've been working with the COG, at the very beginning when I started working, we weren't even really that networked into the region. And Lee has done a great job of bringing us into the network. And I think we just need to keep increasing that network presence and then eventually attain the role of being the leader or a leader in that network. So that's my one observation, is that I think we can keep on working on being that known entity in the region, and that's important to me.
Okay. Yep, and that ultimately would align to what people said should be, I guess the kind of the horizon, looking on the horizon, and how do we want people to think about the COG in 5 years, right? So what you're saying kind of connects to what they're doing, connects what they're doing now with where some people have said they want to see the organization go even further. Heidi, did you have your hand up? I thought I saw that pop up.
Actually, that was a thumbs up to these three.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the feedback. So any other thoughts on the current organizational priorities, and if go into program of work or considerations or initiatives that individuals may want to see come to light, or at least be given some consideration for Lee. So let me, before somebody answers that, let me go to Brett. And Brett, you may be answering the question.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking at this slide and thinking about the word organizational, and I noticed the staff input involved a lot of things, words like collaboration, and I think before it was not being siloed. So I'm wondering, something to add to this is some sort of, it seems like the staff is arranged mostly in expertise areas, but are there cross-cutting teams that staff can work on that would enable collaboration of different topics or different areas of our region, and try to think about how to do more of those cross-cutting things? And I'm not sure if that's would be a number 4 or whatever, or a enumerated thing, or if it's just thinking about how we can collaborate more as a region.
Yeah, and there was some feedback that came out. Yeah, it'd probably be from employees where they said cross collaboration opportunities, cross training, and that going back to how do you take your strengths and address your weaknesses and things like that. And the limited institutional knowledge, I believe, was one of the weaknesses. And so, what you're talking about happens, and it can happen. Now, I know there's some structural things, I guess, based on how there's the fees and charges for services, Lee, if I had to regurgitate what you said, but is it possible to do something, creatively as it relates to bringing people from across those different program areas, so that they could be a greater resource to the member organizations? Yeah, that is something to explore. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Other key considerations or initiatives? Just kind of step through these now and see if there's anything anybody wants to say. And I know
there
there's
was a couple
go
in the
ahead.
chat, but I got them in the notes if you need to move on for time, but yeah.
Okay, let me just review just real quick. Like the current, this first one is service to our members in their communities. Okay, I'm on record. Posing priority DIE. I think Kurt, you made some comments earlier. I believe I may have seen. I'd agree, service to, okay. For adding sustainability question. Okay. So yeah, so I know it's kind of silence, but many of you are participating in the chat. Thank you for that. So those are considerations, initiatives, any current initiatives that absolutely should still continue for the next 3 to 5 years or 3 years. If you can recall any of the current initiatives, it would be great to get some insight there to see what we can, what we should continue, the COG should continue to do. Okay, Don't see any comments, no hands raised. Anything else? And I know there was a couple of points made about the TJCOG review, but anything else from the TJCOGs that you saw that you want further exploration of by the TJCOG? Just anything that may pop to top of mind. Comments? What is your
objection? Actually, I had one quick comment, and it goes back to the early on around some of the wanting to be thought, have the go-to organization and providing thought leadership. And then on a weakness, we had branding and promotion of work. And you had mentioned the unintended consequences of bringing more work. I think if we want to promote and become a thought leader, we have to be able to go back and do the branding and the promotion of the COG if we're going to continue to be that, or want to be the aspirational view of being the thought leader or that go-to organization.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I totally get the fact that it does bring more work, but the more work also brings the opportunity for additional funds and additional areas that we can explore.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's always with marketing promotion is okay. We need to do this, right? That helps get our name out there. It helps people understand who we are, our mission, our purpose. Maybe gets to the what's in it for me and why the COG is important. So, I think there is that tension, that push and pull, right, between the marketing and promotion and the work that can get done. And that just has to be handled on a kind of as you go forward basis. So it sounds like what you're saying is, don't necessarily shy away from that, because this is
right.
how we get to being that thought leader and get to be that go-to organization.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen?
And I would actually echo that, because the branding and marketing gives us it's a focal point and a common purpose and reason to engage in some conversations across all of our jurisdictions that are non-project specific, that are beyond what we normally would be doing. And in that, it provides a foundation for that leadership. But I do think it is a critical part, not as, I hear the frame as extra work. I hear this activity as essential work. Otherwise, we can't do the same things we've done, expect different results.
Yeah. And,
being a shiny light without the outreach, and I don't mean the outreach that we've been doing with the listening sessions, but having that integrated approach of understanding that while we are serving, we are also promoting. One of the catchphrases in any kind of professional services organization is every person's in business development and sales. Every person is promoting and marketing. Mm-hmm. And it is not a separate function that we do in addition to our work. It is an integral part of our approach and how we do our work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is a different but good way of thinking about it, right? Because it's not like, oh, we're going to put out these advertisements and this material, right? But, it's how you show up, right? I know my county manager always instills in me that, you represent Mecklenburg counties. I'm a walking marketing tool if I'm out there in the community representing the organization, right? And at times that may be having other people say, oh, I want to go work for where you work because you're so excited to be there. So yeah, I do agree. It's how you do your work and how you show up.
And we need the tools to support those, you know, the messaging, unified
right.
message, unified, you know, that brand is visual, it's a mental map, it is all of those things. So I just caution us from framing marketing as this separate activity that as if we could do without or reduce. And I think that is a fatal frame for that activity.
Okay. Thank you for that honest feedback. Okay, other thoughts? And so I think this is a good slide to sit on in terms of organizations and things to consider and initiatives as it relates to program of work, right? So kind of what Kathleen was talking about, and I think right before Bill was talking about, you know, marketing promotion is a thing with, you know, objects and what you do in the logo and stuff, but it's also in how we show. You know, so that can definitely be, you know, something we can frame into some type of priority to consider over the next, you know, well, I guess in perpetuity really, or for as long as the organization is around. But any other opportunities?
And Monica, I'm sorry, one other
Yeah.
thing, I would say it's as an operating principle, not, you know, that is, and yes, there's resources, but an operating principle as opposed to a priority.
Okay. So we'll need to, Lee, help distinguish organizational priorities, guiding principles. You know, we'll need to make sure that's all clear in the strategic framework, you know, when we start putting all these pieces together. But yeah, it's how you operate. Kathleen, I hear you in that. Thank you. Thanks, Bill and Kathleen, for those two recommendations. Other thoughts? Is there anything in the chat that we need to discuss?
I've captured them as well for us, Monica. There are a couple statements.
Okay. Okay. So let me go back. Sorry again. Easy way to move through this. So let me go back to those 4 questions. I think the last question was really around other information to consider when developing org priorities. But, you know, I really want you all to continue to think about this because I know we have those current organizational priorities. You know, we're now going to think about adding operating priorities or operating principles rather. There's current initiatives that are underway. Those will continue to carry over into the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years or whatever, but really want to hone in on the org priorities so that when we're creating the strategic framework, we can tell whomever's going to be reading the document that this is really what the COG is interested in. You know, for service to members, and I think somebody provided some suggestions for language changes there. We want to have a DEI lens, although I know there's some dissenting views around that. It seems like with maybe 1 or 2 people or 1 person here today, and that's fair and that's understandable. Data-driven thinking, and then some of the other things that we called out. But for those of you that have not offered your thoughts and suggestions, either in the chat and or have articulated, is there anything that you want to share? Don't want to call out, but I know that we're getting close to the end of our time together and want to give everybody an opportunity to have their voice heard.
Can I provide just a little bit of context around, I just think it's important because I've heard, you know, loud and clear through the feedback from employees and some other things around, you know, the silos and things and just being siloed is a real risk for a council of governments. I've talked about this before. And I think we have to be very mindful and proactive in making sure that we're not siloed. And so the way we're funded, which is very different than a local government, sort of disposes us to being siloed because we get these grants from the federal and state governments that have us produce very specific deliverables. And so we have to be very mindful of trying to stay connected. And so the priorities in a way are trying to convey to staff, what do we all have in common, or what are common expectations for everybody? And I put a comment in there about member services and serving our members, because in the culture that wasn't quite understood as an expectation for everyone. So just because, and you'll find this in other council of governments, because of the way we're funded with so many discrete grants and programs, that is a constant sort of effort to make sure that the whole organization feels connected. Half our staff is just the area agency on aging, which is a whole separate sort of agency. So I think it is very valuable and good that we're talking about how things interconnect and thinking about how we do that proactively, because if we don't talk about it, the natural state of a cog is to silo.
And I think, Lee, that goes back to, thanks for adding your voice. I think that goes back to, some of the things that we saw in the employee comments around their perceptions of the structure, and the need to educate the employee base on what's possible versus what's not. They may not have the bird's eye view that you do. And so, but I think the thing is how do we, as what's his name with the Atlanta Regional Council said, if you don't take risk, then you don't really know what's possible. So it's like, how do we address the need for cross collaboration, cross training, cross pollination, breaking down some of the silos without really breaking down some of the silos. So you got to get really creative, because like you said, the funding kind of restricts the structure. But anyway, thank you for sharing that again. So any other thoughts? I'm not going to hold you guys just to hold you. I know how that is. I've been there before, and so I don't want to force comments out of everybody, but certainly it is important when we come back to you with initial strategic framework draft. It is going to be very important that the full board, maybe more members of the board, give some feedback, so that the strategic framework that reflects the needs of the member organizations as well as the needs of the community. But I do feel comfortable in saying that I believe we got a lot of good feedback from you, and definitely that it's going to change and enhance, I guess I'll say enhance the foundation for the COG, and really kind of push us forward into a new space. And really excited about what may come out with the focus areas as it relates to food security, food systems, food insecurity, as well as, what was the other one we were talking about? I just forgot just that quick, but it's in my notes. And so that is it, unless somebody else has anything that they want to offer as it relates to the board priorities. Okay. And I'll just share next steps, and then Lee and Kathleen, you'll have the adjourn slide. Ready for that. But in terms of next steps, again, draft the strategic framework. Will probably be some back and forth, definitely from me and or between me, Lee, and Jenny, kind of in the small working group, and then we'll take it to the strategic planning steering committee. There's a lot to say. We'll turn to the board for additional review and refinement, and then our goal is to finalize in spring of this year. So I think we said somewhere around April, May. So it's early February. We still have a good amount of time to redo the strategic framework, or to set the strategic framework. Certainly, if you have any thoughts or additional insights, you can go directly. But you have my contact information in there as well. It's not going to be additional, anything charge or anything like that. If you want to just share it with me, because it'll come directly to me as the one developing the strategic framework. And or if it's something that you say, hey, Monica, I really want to talk through with you, then shoot me an email and we can jump on a quick call that way. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lee and to close y'all out and to provide anything around next steps and anything else you may need to keep in mind as we go forward. So thank you for your participation today.
I'll just real quickly say thank you to all our board members for giving up a Saturday morning. I know we don't do this often at all, asking you to work on a Saturday. So thank you for your time and your dedication to the organization. This is very helpful for me, and we'll certainly be back in touch and be talking about this more. So Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to you. And the only formal thing that you have to do, other than whatever comments you want to give, we do need to have a motion to adjourn. So other than that, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. And I concur to thank everyone. You know, this work, I think, is critical for any governing body, and that's, you know, all of us, that is what we're here for, and advocating for the region. And please continue on. We have had good discussion, looking forward to the future. And with that, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move. This is Ken Marshford.
All righty then.
Second.
Bill Haggis, I'll second.
So there was an awfully long pause between that motion and a second.
Well, it's trying to get off of mute these days.
Yeah. Finding your cursor.
Okie dokie. Well then, I'm assuming, Lee, do we need to have a formal vote, or can we just sign off?
Is there a quorum, Kathleen?
Earlier there was not, and that's why I'm asking.
You don't take a vote to adjourn, so I think
Thank you.
You are more than fine to just adjourn on the motion.
Okay, I am free to release all. So
Thank you, Kathleen, and everyone.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
See ya. All right. Got a couple hanging back.
Yeah.
So Jenny, I saved the chat. I don't know if you did as well. Uh-oh, you're on mute.
Jenny, you're on mute.
Sorry. The word
You
of
wanna-
2020, 2021, and 2022.
Oh, right.
Jenny, do you want to turn off the live stream
Yes.
and the recording?